companies, power companies, had previously pinned their hopes on nuclear, but shutting down 53 nuclear reactors, they had to do something. So what they did was start to import LNG, and mostly from the existing suppliers in Qatar and lately Australia. So this event triggered the then BC Liberal government to take and start to promulgate an LNG industry in BC, and with it, the upstream end of that, which is fracking. The promises were spelled out in several speeches by then Premier Clark: 75,000 long-term jobs, 100,000 overall. The British Columbians would be first in line for those jobs. Not much point in an industry where there aren't any. But in the meantime, BC has signed an agreement with China for temporary foreign workers because we have no LNG industry. So we don't have any people experienced to run it. A debt-free BC, this is quite attractive, and it attracted my interest immediately because BC's current provincial debt's over 73 billion, and not counting the current $13 billion deficit, mainly due to COVID, nor BC Hydro's multi-billion run-of-river contracts. And last but not least, this was advertised as the cleanest fossil fuel on the planet. Lately amended to cleanest burning fossil fuel on the planet, and the difference is rather significant. The promise was that we'd make cleaner air in China, which it could use, at the expense of course, making our own somewhat dirtier. It was part of the BC election in 2013. They put it on their bus here that we'd have a debt-free BC, and since per capita we all owe around $14,500 just in BC accumulated deficit alone, this is rather important. Not much of a legacy to leave your children with a huge per capita debt on their shoulders. So we'll see how much, if any, those promises have been met. There started to be immediately about 20 proposals for LNG facilities, only 4 of whom are showing any signs of life at the moment. The first 2 being in the Lower Mainland, Fortis Tilbury expansion near Delta, the wood fiber LNG plant, which I've been particularly concerned about in Squamish, and then the 2 up north, LNG Canada, which is under construction at the moment, and Kitimat LNG, its close neighbor, which has had approval to go ahead since 2006 and can be described as alive, but a doctor might have trouble determining any pulse. LNG Canada is a consortium of Shell, Petronas, Kogas, Korea Gas, PetroChina, and Mitsubishi, so it's a varied consortium. They're currently building or trying to build the Coastal GasLink pipeline through, of course, Wet'suwet'en Territory, and it's in Kitimat, and planned production is a biggie, about 27 million tons per year. Phase 1 is being constructed, so that's half of it. It's mostly gas powered, so it's going to have a huge environmental and GHG footprint, but it has local Haisla Nation approval and a 40-year Canadian Energy Regulator export license. Kitimat LNG, as I said, is barely alive because Chevron wants to sell its share, and Woodside is reporting losses from its Australian operations. It's also in Kitimat, a little further out in Douglas Channel at Bish Cove. It's about 10 megatons per year. It was originally approved as an import terminal and then switched it around to, but they too need a pipeline, and the Pacific Trail pipeline is about 500 kilometers from the Prince George area. Wood fiber, this is a picture of the old pulp mill there. This is an old brownfield site that the Singapore company, Wood Fiber LNG, which is a subsidiary of Pacific Oil and Gas, bought in 2014, I believe. The planned production is a small one, relatively, 2 million tons a year, guaranteeing about 100 jobs. It's mostly grid powered, which would make it one of the first in the world and would, of course, reduce its GHG emissions profile considerably. It has Squamish First Nation approval, aided and abetted by generous donations from both the company and the BC government, and a 40-year export license as well. It's opposed by all the local municipal councils and, of course, My Sea to Sky and other NGOs. Last but not least, and recently, there has been a proposal by Fortis to expand its Tilbury LNG facility on the at Tilbury Island, very near the Massey Tunnel. It's trying to be 4 or 5 million tons a year. Would be grid powered. It's at the beginning of its environmental assessment process, and it's definitely opposed by Richmond Council. You can see a picture of it as it stands today. The phase 1 tank, this expansion is in 2 phases, is 34,000 tons. That's at the back there. It's, as I said, it's right close to Massey Tunnel. This is that tank up and close and personal. It's pretty impressive. There's a lot of minus 162 degree LNG in there, or will be when they finish it. You have to cool methane, the natural gas component, to minus 162, shrink it by a factor of about 600. It turns into a liquid at that temperature, and then you can ship it. Shipping the gas as gas is not advantageous. Upstream, you've got fracking. Peter will talk a bit more about what this looks like in practice, but you have a fracking well, and this looks typically like this in the middle of Northeast BC, and it uses vast amounts of water, 10 million tons per, or 10 million liters per well, and the produced water, the stuff that comes back up, is dirty with various chemicals and other things that it picks up en route. And of course, fracking water itself is a combination of chemicals, water, and sand. Where this Northeast BC gas is right on the Alberta BC border. If you look there, the vertical line in the middle is the BC Alberta border, Edmonton on the right, Prince George on the left, and all the red dots are fracking holes, about 25,000 of them so far, in what's called the Montney Formation. There's another formation further north that's less developed. This, of course, centered around Fort St. John and, of course, the South Sea Dam. Fracking has some nasty consequences, including earthquakes induced in the shale beds up there, which is threatening the stability of something called the South Sea Dam. Fracking, you drill down a couple of kilometers, you turn the drill on its side, you run along the seam, you put in these fracking chemicals at great pressure, and basically explode or fracture the rock, and then the gas comes out to the surface, and you have to separate it in a essentially refining process to extract the methane. A problem with these fracking holes is that they decline very quickly in terms of productivity. Over 3 years, you're getting very little out. So what they do is they have to pick up sticks and move the fracking well over a couple of kilometers. And this is what your country looks like when you're finished doing that. This is in Wyoming rather. And it looks like a bad case of measles or smallpox has struck your country. In northern BC, it's covered by forests. So it's masked a bit, but this is what it looks like, beginning to look like. If you're a First Nations person up there, this is absolutely terrible for your environment. This is what it looks like in Colorado and New Mexico. And we would have to do about 50,000 of these wells if we're going to export the planned 82 million tons of LNG. After fracking, you refine it at a treatment plant to separate the methane from propane and butane and other things which are usually flared off, increasing their GHG content. And then you send it by pipeline to a typical onshore export. The big tank on the left is a storage tank at minus 162. You can see the tanker there with 5 great big thermos bottles, which is essentially what they are, at a distance from the shore. And all of the stuff in front is basically enormous refrigerator to take the room temperature gas and turn it into a liquid at minus 162. Tankers are big. This one is a typical tanker, unfortunately named the Acro I-bomb. And I've shown it in Howe Sound. I did up this picture. The Queen of Surrey BC ferry to Langdale is shown. It's about half. So this LNG tanker is about twice as long, twice as wide, twice as high as a typical BC ferry. And it's containing, usually running about 60 to 65,000 tons of LNG in all those tanks. It's bigger than an apartment block. This is a LNG ship coming into Boston Harbor, where they have and have had since 1970s an LNG facility they've been trying to get rid of. At public expense, this safety and security is pretty serious when one of these things comes into port, especially after 9/11, and it costs the city of Boston about $80,000 every time for security arrangements every time one of these comes in. Why? Because LNG is classified by the International Maritime Organization as a dangerous substance, second only to explosives. It's class 2. When 9/11 happened, a committee of the US Senate said, well, LNG plants and tankers are targets, right? And a commission started to look at it. The commission, by the way, was chaired by Joe Biden. And the equivalent of the National Research Council, called Sendia National Lab, started to look and said, well, what happened if you put a hole in the side of an LNG tanker near in a watery environment? And it said, well, it would spill out onto the surface of the ocean. It would pick up warmth from the ocean water that's 150 or something, 170 degrees warmer than the LNG. It would form a low white cloud of fog and would drift on whatever the wind blew it for quite a long way. So when they asked, well, how long? They said 3.5 kilometers, worst case. So the US put in some regulations and said, you really can't and shouldn't build LNG plants or have LNG tankers go within 3.5 kilometers of populated areas, because this sort of thing can happen if you catch fire, if it catches fire, which it does rather easily. If you plot the 3.5 kilometers for the Tilbury LNG, the outer dotted line there is the 3.5 kilometer distance. You're passing tankers with 65,000 tons of LNG, very close, in fact, overlapping highly populated areas of Richmond and Delta. Climate change, as we know, is a real and present danger, which we must act now. The IPCC has been pretty consistent, and Canada has so far failed 8 of the 9 promises it has made in terms of restraining the growth of greenhouse gases. We're about to miss the 9th in 2020, and of course we have recently the act that absolves the current government from any responsibility for reducing LNG or reducing GHGs by 2030, until 2030. The full life cycle of plant emissions from LNG facilities means that only about 5% of the emissions come from LNG plants themselves. Most of it is where it's burnt, although there is a significant amount that arrives from leakages in wellheads and upstream. So this is kind of the profile of where the damage is done. Most of it is at the combustion end, which in this case for BC LNG would be Asia. About three and a third tons for every ton of LNG. So even if they made the LNG plants emission-free, which is rather difficult, the end combustion would mean that there would be over 3 tons of greenhouse gases for every ton we export, and we plan to export 80 million of them. Led David Hughes, a contributor to the Fracked book. It says, on a full cycle emissions basis, the planet would be better off if China built state-of-the-art coal plants rather than burning BC LNG for the next 50 years. He's the former chief research geoscientist for the Geological Survey of Canada and a noted authority on the subject, because the industry claims that we will solve our GHG problem if we replace coal with LNG. This statement is rather important to rebut that. Other effects, not so good for our southern resident killer whale endangered species, with these tankers increasing. And of course, every LNG plant has a flare, which if you are as me, I'm a former astrophysicist, the night sky is rather important. This destroys that. The economics are important of LNG because we have post-Fukushima, the price of LNG per million British thermal units went up close to $20, which has got the BC Liberal government all excited about it. Currently, it's down to around $6.75 last I looked this morning. And the bad news for LNG producers is that the break-even is about 10. So making it for less than 7, I'm making it for 10 rather and selling it for less than 7 is not a path to our debt-free BC nor anything like it. And the chances that this will contribute to the coffers of BC are pretty small. Also arriving is not just competitors around the world for LNG, but the growth of renewables as a competing source of power is pretty significant. And we have now achieved grid parity today this year with coal-electric-based power generation. So the days of LNG are numbered, and the producers of natural gas, like Fortis, are inventing other ways in which they might continue their happy path and to keeping their business alive, which is selling gas to you and me to heat our houses and cook our food. But we're more and more turning to renewable sources. The other thing is that a whole pile of other competitors got the idea at the same time Christy Clark did, and there's now a glut and is predicted to last for a long time. So
2 minutes.
Thanks. The jobs are mostly in LNG or mostly in drill crews. And as a parent, this is not my preferred future for my children. In case you think that if the oil and gas industry, including the mining industry in BC, went away, would our economy collapse? It's less than 2% of the total GDP for BC. And we're currently giving away the gas because as the green line there, gas production has increased, gas revenues have dropped. So we're not making any money out of it. If you had the unfortunate habit of investing in oil and gas firms, this graph should tell you that over the last roughly 6 years, if you had invested $100 in oil and gas firms like these, you would have lost 70 cents roughly of your investment. So the money is going out of this industry, and about time. The only possible sustainable energy future we've got is renewable energy. And I always like to quote Sheikh Yamani. He's a Saudi oil minister who said way back in the 70s, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones, and the oil age will end long before the world runs out of oil. And I think that's very true. And there's another statement here by Wayne Gretzky, which says what we should be doing, which is going towards renewable. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eoin. We really appreciate that overview, and to your also your ongoing work on this. You keep us up to date with what's happening with the industry, and for your contribution to the book. We also it's way stronger for your contribution. So Maude Barlow. Maude has dedicated much of her life to looking at water and water policy, water practices, both in Canada and around the world. Many of you know that she was responsible at the United Nations for introducing the water is a human right. I've forgotten the technical language for it.
Resolution.
The resolution, thank you very much. And is known both here and all over the world as being one of our primary champions for water. She's a former chairperson of the Council of Canadians, has received a wonderful number of honorary doctorates, and has co-authored at least 19 books including a number on Canadian water, the last couple being Boiling Point, which is about government neglect, corporate abuse, Canada's water crisis, and whose water is it anyway? Which is a kind of prescription for taking water protection into public hands for people in Canada. She's also contributed to the book All Fracked Up, and has focused her contribution, of course, on water. So Maude, please.
Well, thank you very much, Alice. And thank you very much, Dolores and Esther, for the wonderful work you did on this superb book. I just want to take a minute and have everybody see this book. If you haven't got it yet, please get it. If you can help us get it out there, it's really important. Not only does it have wonderful material, but it is just a beautifully put together piece of work. And I just want to thank the editors for the work that you did putting this together. It's a lot of love and a lot of personal volunteer time that went into this. So thank you. And just delightful to be here with my colleagues. I guess the first thing I want to say is that this just really a disgraceful situation that the government of BC, and it's like this across the country, and certainly the federal government as well, does not ask the questions about what is the impact of water or fracking on water. It's just hardly asked. I mean, it'll be in passing, one might ask, but it's not taken seriously. In 2019, the government of British Columbia did undertake what they called a major scientific review. But the scientists and the researchers said, look, we came up with many troubling questions and what we consider to be infractions of regulation, but we have nowhere near enough research or information or hard data to even begin to say what we should be doing and what kind of a plan we should have. Now, I don't need to remind, I think, most new British Columbians, and that's mostly who's on this call today, that the province is in trouble water-wise. Another 2019 government-owned Climate Action Secretariat said that looking at the list of issues right at the top of climate change is water, and they really said that the concern around drought and water shortages is right up there at the top of concerns. As you know, 2020 was the sixth summer in a row of severe drought around British Columbia, the islands, particularly in the north, where there were level 4 warnings as a threat to salmon, a threat to other wildlife, a threat to local communities. And yet, this free-for-all continues. The federal government is not much better. It allows, or at least I should say, it has not approved of hundreds of the chemicals that we know are in fracking, the fracking recipe. And the Council of Canadian Academics a few years ago was asked to do a report on fracking and its impact on water. And they said the same thing that the BC report said, which is there's just no research, nobody's taken it seriously. It's impossible to do a proper analysis or give you a proper plan of action. So this is all part of what I call the myth of abundance. Most of us grew up hearing the stat that we have 20% of the world's water. And so it's fine. You can dump whatever you want. There's so much groundwater. You can move it from there to here. It doesn't matter. You just have to, not worry about it. It's like trees and fish, and we've just got so much of it. Who needs to worry? So it's a real free for all. And we need to remember that we have about 6.5% of the world's available fresh water. That's the water you can use without destroying the source. So back to BC then, in this situation of not taking this seriously, it is, as I learned doing the research for this part of the book, is that there's just been an enormous kind of like the Wild West again. You just take anything, don't worry about it. Each fracking operation uses on average about 21 million liters of water, but some are in North America as large as 100 million per operation. I looked at the BC government licenses water for fracking, and it is just seeing exponential growth, which I think is really interesting in light of Eoin's very clear stats on how the demand, the market demand is going. And these actually don't meet up with how much water is being used by the fracking industry, but somehow they seem to think that it's still absolutely crucial to get these licenses. So in 2016, the BC Oil, Gas and Gas Commission licensed 18 billion liters of water for fracking. In 2017, that was up to 34 billion, went up in 2018 to 38 billion. In 2019, when I did the research, it was only halfway through. The second quarter was already up to 41 billion. So you can see now that we've got this exponential demand for water for this industry when, you know, the number, as Eoin showed, the number of fracking LNG terminals and so on that we expected was going to happen is not happening. So what does the industry know? What do they think? Are they riding this out? But they are grabbing these licenses, and it's very important. There's also, of course, the conversion to LNG itself, and that takes a lot of water. I was looking through the industry documents themselves, and the LNG facility at Kitimat, which, as Eoin says, is, you know, not alive, but they haven't given up. It would drain 3 million liters of water an hour from the Kitimat River, that one facility alone. So we are talking, this is for demineralizing and for cooling systems for the process. So you could see the catastrophic implications for local systems, local water sources with the plethora of these kinds of projects, LNG terminals. Additional concerns, of course, are that by the fracking wells, by the fracking operations, are massive frac fluid impoundment areas where the water containing these chemicals is kept. These are mega storage dams, and the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives did a study and said that they counted hundreds of unregulated impoundment areas in the northern part of British Columbia beside these fracking operations. They called them time bombs, and these are not supposed to be there. They're unregulated, they're unauthorized, but it's as if, as I said earlier, it's this myth of abundance. Don't worry about the water. It's the last thing you have to worry about. And of course, this fracking fluid has many, many contaminants in it. We know that there are over 600 identified chemicals in the fracking operations in North America, at least a quarter of which have been linked to cancer and other mutations. And these impoundment, they leach, this stuff leaches into the local water. Sometimes it's stored. It's injected and stored deep underground. It contaminates the groundwater. There have been many studies in the US linking the leaks of this kind of contaminated fracking fluid to drinking water contamination, to the death of animals, to the destruction of vegetation, to the destruction of local forests. There are, again, it's not being properly documented in British Columbia, but the University of Victoria gives one example where they said that a toxic waste from fracking equal in volume to 24 World Trade Center towers was injected into one single well site in northern British Columbia. As is the case with so many of these extractive industry invasions, they hit and hurt First Nations first. And I'm coming to you today from unceded Algonquin territory in Ottawa, and the concern around not just drinking water and sanitation, but the destruction of local water sources by oil and gas and mining and now fracking across the country is really shocking. I've been in communities where the ground is just pockmarked by extractive industries, and now we have another one, and as Eoin says, it doesn't even make market sense, but it's kind of got this energy. You know, we started it, we put money into it like Site C Dam, we can't stop it. Well, yes, we can. The way to stop a train that's out of, or a bicycle that's out of control is to put your foot down on the side and stop the thing and say that this was a mistake to start with. I want to just end by saying that the world is in, the planet is in crisis water-wise. I mean, we have been gifted in North America, gifted in British Columbia to have an unusually significant portion of the planet's water per capita. And I consider that to be a responsibility. It's not just a gift and, as I say earlier, a free-for-all for anything we want. This is something that we need to take responsibility for because the world needs it, we need it, future generations need it, the ecosystem needs it. The UN says within 5 years, about 2/3 of the world's population will be living in water-stressed areas of the world. Many, many are now. Every day, 2 billion people are forced to drink contaminated water because they can't get access to clean water. They can't afford it. And we know that a child under 5 dies every 2 minutes somewhere in the world. So and then COVID comes along. Wash your hands, keep clean, keep your environment clean, your house and your workplace clean. Well, over half the population of the world doesn't have a place to wash their hands with warm water and soap. So when we come back to the beautiful British Columbia, and it is beautiful British Columbia, and the gift of the planet's water, so much of it being there, we have to protect it. We did adopt, and Canada has adopted, not only now, it didn't adopt it first, the resolution on water and sanitation as human rights. In fact, under the Harper government, Canada led the fight against the recognition of water and sanitation as human rights, which is just appalling. But we have now formally adopted it, and we've formally adopted under it the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, which really talks about the right of the collective, the cultural right to protect the local resource, the local nature, the local sources of life. This is something that's been spelled out in a brand new way in this resolution. So we have a chance to start doing this right. And if COVID has taught us anything, surely it teaches us several things. One is that we can meet a crisis together when we have to, when we name it, and we can move forward. Secondly, it teaches us the need to promote and protect public services. And clean water is a human right. Healthcare is a human right. These are fundamental. And when a pandemic comes along, you understand it even more. But I think the other is that we have to protect the gifts of nature. We have to protect Mother Earth, and the gift of water that we've been given in this country, in the province of British Columbia, must be protected. Fracking is a deadly threat to the existence of and the protection of water and watersheds in British Columbia, and among many others, a very, very good reason to put our foot down from that bicycle that's going downhill and just say, stop. So thank you very much. Miigwech.
Thank you, Maude. As we've gone through this and through the production of the book, we actually think that you've acted a bit as a muse for us. Your dedication and your concern about water, you've actually been our muse. And I think it's also one of the first things that communities, when they're hit with the question of whether or not fracking is of concern to them, one of the very first things that they think about is water and how it's affecting their water. It's one of the very first things that people need, pay attention to. And
I just agree with you, Alice, that when we fought and won stop the Energy East pipeline, which would have gone from Hardisty, Alberta, all the way to New Brunswick to be put on tankers and shipped either across the sea or down to Texas, down the Atlantic to Texas, it was water. It was people's local water source. They said, oh my God, you're going to bring that, you're going to put the dirtiest energy on earth, the dirtiest oil on earth in a pipeline that's coming. In Winnipeg's case, it comes right under the pipeline that brings them water. It touches people's hearts, and when they understand that you're playing with the thing that we need for life, it really can be a very powerful motivator.
Well, again, thank you to our muse, and to for all of the work that you continue to do around water. And we will be in touch as we go through this next phase of our projects. But I want to move now to Peter McCartney. Peter, while I'm doing this, maybe unmute yourself and let us all sort of shift to you. Peter, Peter is an environmental journalist and climate campaigner. He works with the Wilderness Committee. He works from the unceded Coast Salish territories, which is wide-ranging, and has been active in mobilizing communities against fossil fuel projects. And, you know, I guess one of the things that is being very important is that, you know, you're working towards a just transition to a zero carbon economy. But he's just returned from a trip to exactly this part of the province that we are beginning to want to be able to see, want to be able to, you know, kind of understand in our, not just our imaginations, in our understanding of the way the world works. And we are really hoping that you'll be able to share with us what you saw, some of the impacts of fracking, the kinds of things that are going on in the communities there. So Peter, please.
Great. Yeah. Well, you know, thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me here to share some of what I saw up on my trip in September. And, you know, just again, thanks for the gift to the movement that is that All Fracked Up. You know, I think it's needed, and it's just got such a great collection from a lot of wonderful people. So thank you to everyone who contributed to that as well. I'm going to share some of my slides here. And I believe that all worked. And I'm curious, just, you know, if folks can maybe put in the chat, if you've been to northeastern British Columbia, to the Peace region, where some of this fracking is going on. Looks like there's a couple here who have. You know, it's a part of the world that is actually, you know, stunningly beautiful. The fracking aside, you know, I was there in September, and all the tree leaves were changing. So just this beautiful sort of quilt of green and yellow in the aspen and spruce across the landscape. And you know, it's just really disheartening what has happened up there. But I think one of the reasons that it's been allowed to happen is because it's, you know, in a corner of the province that most people in this province will never visit. It's sort of out of sight, out of mind. And, you know, other than for the communities that live there who, you know, have a really complicated relationship with the gas industry, you know, most people don't get to see it. And, you know, that's a theme of what I experience every time I'm going up there, is this culture of, you know, suppression of information. You drive down the Alaska Highway and, you know, you can't see a lot of the fracking from the road. You have to look carefully because they've set up a visual barrier. But as soon as you get, like a zone around the Alaska Highway where they're supposed to protect visual impacts. But as soon as you get, you know, 200 meters from the road, it just opens up into, you know, massive labyrinth of all sorts of fracking infrastructure, well pads, pipelines, access roads, everything that comes with fracking development. So I just wanted to orient folks before you know, getting into the bad stuff about what this region's like. You know, Maude talked about water, and the rivers up there are just these like beautiful, gentle, sort of carved across these big plateaus for millennia in the landscape. And you know, it's home to Denizah, Denetah, and Métis peoples, some of whom are in a part of Treaty 8. You know, the indigenous communities up there have a whole variety of sort of strategies of trying to deal with fracking, which I'll get into later. But you know, it really is a beautiful part of the world if you can manage to get up there. And then there's this. You know, so much of the landscape there is just torn apart. And when you're driving along, you know, this is just driving along on the Alaska Highway. It was getting close to sunset, and I'd had a big day of driving around looking at fracking rigs. And I saw, out of the corner of my eye on the horizon, just this ball of flames. And so, I kind of pulled up my satellite imagery and tried to figure out where would this be coming from, because I had to go, take a photo of it. And after, a half hour or so of finding my way down resource roads, I came across this 6-story high plume of flame. And this isn't unusual. This was maybe the first one I saw, but there are, dozens, if not hundreds, of gas plants in northeastern British Columbia, most of which are, spewing carbon pollution into the atmosphere at any given time. And so, you have these really incredible images of fire coming out, but there's also the invisible methane gas that Eoin talked about driving climate change, which is just leaking from these all the time. And to give you a sense, this is the Petronas compressor station, and the footprint of this is just one little corner. And this basically echoes all the way across from the Rocky Mountains to the Alberta border and beyond in the Montney, where it's just been carved up into these sort of alien-looking fracking installations. And to give you a sense, people have in their minds of the tar sands the massive, massive open pit mines that they have. But when you add up the footprint of fracking in northeastern British Columbia, it's actually 5 times larger than all of those big open pit mines in the tar sands combined. And it's tough to really wrap your head around how much forest and farmland has really been overtaken by this industry, because it's spread out over an area the size of Nova Scotia. But it has massive, massive impacts on the landscape, on the local communities that live there. This was my best attempt to give people a sense. It's not a great photo, but this is off the top of Pink Mountain in northeastern BC. And I went up there during the daytime and got sort of a panorama of the landscape horizon. And then at nighttime, I stayed up there overnight and took another one. And those are all gas plants on the horizon. Those are all connected to dozens and dozens of fracking wells where they pour in, and it really gives you a sense of just how massive this is. The water that comes from there and the impacts to the landscape because of all the wastewater, it's stored in these ponds before they pump it back underground eventually. I talked to a Soto elder who said, he doesn't even go into his hunting grounds anymore because the moose there just aren't good enough to eat. The West Moberly have done a study where they were finding tumors in their moose because they come along and drink from these ponds. The fence falls over, or the liner rips, and it ends up poisoning the landscape there, and ultimately the people that live there as well. So this is a water hub for tourmaline, and you see these all over the landscape there. This is a Kelt compressor station. Again, just stretches for miles and miles and miles across. This is a water supply that's been created by Inga Lake. It's just about as big as the lake in the background there. There's a campsite on the lake where I found some families that were camping there, and this is used to feed that compressor station and the fracking that's linked to it from beforehand. This was an interesting one. I heard from some locals that there was this giant pile of toxic fracking sludge up in the Northeast. And this is a company called Tervita, which disposes of, dirt with hydrocarbons in it. Literal fracking sludge is the term for some of it. There's a radioactive, naturally occurring radioactive materials in here. And this thing's about 50 meters tall. I tried to get my drone all the way over to it in the road and estimate the height of it by the time I was out there. And you can see that, there's dump trucks loading their little ones on the side of it. These things came in, I stood outside trying to film a video, and they came in 3 or 4 at a time into this, just dumping more and more waste from all over the northern boreal forest. This is the ConocoPhillips Montney plant. They're actually recycling part of the water here, but it's a bit of a lie when the industry claims to be treating the water. They say, oh, well, we recycle it, but they just use it again and again to make it more and more toxic, and then still end up pumping it underground. So, they're really not saving anything. And as Maude mentioned, they're using more and more of it all the time. So it's a bit of a greenwash campaign. And this is Encana's tower fracking site. Again, just, this one makes me think of the climate impacts of this industry. And, basically from 2008 to 2014, methane emissions spiked, and they have since then continued to spike. And they found out that the fracking industry was contributing a majority of this. Just in those few short years, there was another 25 million tons of methane emissions in the atmosphere. And that's a huge problem, because methane is contributing, a quarter of the warming that we've seen so far. It's a really, really potent greenhouse gas. And so, you see all over this last, flare stacks just pouring out into the atmosphere. And of course, the fracking installations themselves, all the valves, and fixtures that are leaking methane emissions as well. So it's a huge problem, and we need to get it sorted before we need to not build liquefied natural gas facilities that would require tens of thousands of new wells in this area that has already been hit so hard. With my last little bit of time, I just wanted to talk about, I want to make sure I get to the First Nations, sort of strategies up there, some of the communities. Each First Nation takes a bit of a different, nuanced position on fracking. The Blueberry River First Nation has gone to court and is currently suing the provincial government over treaty violations, which, they have around 80% of their territory is within 250 meters of some sort of industrial development, fracking being, one of the major contributors to that. So, that we're hoping to hear the results of that court case, next year, and that could, give Blueberry River some decision-making power over what's going on in its territory. The Doig River Nation has set up a tribal park along the BC-Alberta border, where it's been really quite effective in keeping fracking out of that area. The Fort Nelson First Nation has a Guardians program where they're training their members to be out on the land doing the things that they were already doing largely, but to gather environmental data and monitoring so that they have baselines to work from if fracking creeps into their territory a little more. And then the Saulteaux and West Moberly nations have again worked to keep fracking out of the Twin Sisters area, really kind of prioritizing up there where they're able to protect some of their culturally important sites. So I think that's
Peter. We're just within a couple of minutes. Okay.
Great. I would just I would encourage people, if you can, to get up there, but if not, learn as much as you can about this industry. and advocate for the provincial government to do something about it. You know, they're able to get away with subsidizing and supporting fracking and LNG to the extent that they are, because not a lot of people know about it. And so, you know, just try and spread the word, and together, you know, I think with this provincial government, we have a real shot at reigning in this industry.
Again, thank you, Peter. Thank you for taking the trip up there. Thank you to your drone. And this is a technology that's making it possible for us to actually see things from the air, which I think in this case is very helpful. And you've done exactly what we're hoping to do with some of this work, which is to provide windows for the rest of us who actually can't be there or aren't there into what's happening. So we very much appreciate this this piece that you've done, and hope that you can, you know, keep doing it. So again, thank you very much. Now, we want to move into a bit more of a discussion and questions. And as you're thinking about your questions, we'd like you, of course, to think about a couple of things. Now just give me a minute here. I didn't share that. Just a second. Okay, so one of the things is that I really want you to know this is the first in a series. And Dolores and I had agreed that we were going to do a couple of them. We were going to, you know, ask the people who have been involved in our, in putting together the collection, the All Fracked Up collection, if they would be prepared to do sessions like this. And many have, a number have. But then we're realizing that actually there may be a broader conversation developing. In the last couple of days, Dolores, you've just, you know, you've had a conversation with some of the folks who are involved in some of the Site C work.
Yeah.
They would like to do a session that talks about the connection between fracking and that district and Site C.
Yes, that'll be, I think we're going to call it Site C, LNG, and me. And that'll be sometime in January. We haven't set up the date yet. Okay.
And on December the 7th, we're going to do a second in the series that we've planned. Dr. Melissa Lem, who's with the Canadian Physicians for the Environment, will be joining us. Mitchell Beer, who is continually watching the finances of this industry and who you know, has contributed one of the chapters to the book. He's going to be joining us. Roman Chesno, who did the study on methane emissions from the locations in British Columbia, will be joining us, and we're hoping for somebody from the Unistoten group. We think that someone from the Unistoten camp or the Wet'suwet'en will be joining us. So that's on December the 8th. No, December the 7th. So keep in touch with that. Again, a number of people have talked about the All Fracked Up book. You can order that from Watershed Sentinel, and drop us a line either here or in other ways if you don't know quite how to do that. Yeah. So, and I know that some people may be interested as we're doing this chat and question and answer period. So I want you to actually take this opportunity to really thank the three of you, Eoin, Maude, and Peter, for your completely substantial and wonderful contributions to this session. And then to the Glasswater Foundation, to people who've been doing a bunch of the support that makes it possible for us to do this. So to Corey, to Claire, and to Sarah. So thanks to everybody. Okay, so now if there are questions developing, I think there are, several have showed up in the last couple of minutes. So Dolores and I are going to be collecting them, and maybe the three of you can be also watching.
Yeah,
the
be
questions.
ready to jump in.
Yeah.
But first I have a statement or a comment from Ken Boone, who's the president of the Peace Valley Landowner Association, who couldn't make this webinar, but he said he wanted to hear comments on this, and I suspect, and this is probably in your wheelhouse. I am appalled at the taxpayer ratepayer subsidy of the electrification of the upstream facilities in the gas fields of Northeast BC. This continuation of former Liberal, now NDP policy is a money-losing and futile attempt to try to reduce the massive greenhouse gas emissions of the LNG for export. It is very critical and makes a mockery of the Clean BC plan. It is also an attempt to create a market for Site C power that otherwise does not exist. And he says that this is where society needs to focus, is to focus on the energy and climate front. So I'm not sure there was a question in there exactly, but I'm going to ask Eoin if he can elaborate a little, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, Ken's a farmer in the Peace Valley, and we are submerging the best farmland north of Hope to make electricity that is not required by you and me. And even if it were, there are far cheaper, better, less risky ways of doing it. Site C is going to cost somewhere north of $12 billion. And it doesn't have a market in BC currently, except applied to the LNG and fracking business. The problem, of course, with LNG plants and Site C is that LNG plants are on the coast, whereas Site C is 1,000 kilometers inland. So you have to build great power lines to get from one to the other. The subsidies, I was in the legislature the day that the Clark government introduced a great bill helping out Petronas to hopefully, what they hoped was make Northwest LNG a reality. And I saw the front bench of the NDP, now the government, stand up and one after the other complain bitterly about the giveaway of public resources to this industry. And then fast forward 5 more years and we have the same people handing out subsidies even larger than the BC Liberals did. It's quite appalling. I calculated and I watched them carefully what the subsidies are for just the wood fiber plant, and it turns out that the subsidies amount to about $500,000 per job per year, which is insane public policy for an industry that won't give them back anything anyway, because most of them, including the owner of wood fiber, are rather handy agents at offshoring profits away from any taxation that might be payable locally. So Ken's perfectly right. The combination of trying to build Site C to flog its energy at half price, that's half the cost of producing it, to an industry that isn't going to do us any good, is breathtakingly stupid. And I can't think of no other more appropriate word.
There's a question that's specifically about water. Maude, can you and anyone else, of course, but it's from Trish in Paul River. She says the provincial government is going to review water licenses in 2044, according to the Water Sustainability Act. Are there any checks on the horrendous amount of water being wasted through these licenses, including foreign proprietorship of licenses to bottle water, for example? The time frame for reviews is appalling. The ministry to which I've written seems to have no problem with this time frame in their response. Any kind of response to that?
Well, I think my colleagues probably, and even you guys as well, living in BC, you probably have a better handle on the politics of that particular situation. It is appalling, Trish. You're absolutely right. As is the fact, and I'll just go away from fracking for a minute, that the Federation of BC or Union of BC Municipalities 2 years ago now adopted unanimously a resolution to ask the government, the Horgan government, to ban access to groundwater for bottled water purposes. They never got to the government. Just some bureaucrat wrote back and said, no, we're not going to do anything with it. So the political will here is incredibly important. I think I cede to my colleagues for more specific information on that, but we need to keep at it. And I think this has been such a very rich event that we've just had, and I would hope that this can be filmed and get it into schools and universities. I've lived long enough now, and I've seen enough when we do things right and when we don't do things right, and I really feel we're on a roll here. And we do have, I know that the Horgan government now has a majority, and one could say, okay, well, they've got more authority to do worse things, but I have just this feeling that it's the moment to go on Site C and fracking, in particular. I just think the public is with us and we need to move on it.
Peter, yeah, go.
I was going to say that leads directly into our next questions, Maude. And I think in some ways I'm going to throw this one at Peter, because Wilderness Committee does an awful lot of really good organizing. So the question is, how do we connect thousands of people? I mean, we're wonderful people, but we're only a handful here compared to the thousands we need. And tied to that, Virginia's asking about suggestions for effective concrete actions. So Peter first, and then the rest of you jump in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, connecting with people is one of the things we do best at the Wilderness Committee. So, we've got big plans next year for, a rollout of a lot of communications pieces for people to share. I think the biggest thing is that there's already hundreds of thousands of people who care about climate change in, the population centers and beyond in BC, and that's a lot of where the BC NDP has MLAs and their power, and plugging into some of the incredible youth organizing that has gone on in the last couple of years with climate strikes, and making sure that folks know, hey, like BC has a fossil fuel industry too. It's not just the tar sands. And have the information to wield that power really effectively with this provincial government. I think youth are some of the most powerful messengers we have, because if your kid comes home and says that, they are deeply worried about their future because of what's going on in, northeastern BC, you're going to listen and you're going to call your elected officials. And I really think at this point, the most effective thing we can be doing right now is to connect with, those MLAs, Green, NDP, even Liberal, who get it on climate change, but are maybe afraid to stand up and speak out against this, and to lean on them to, create sort of a movement within the party to actually do something about this, because there are lots of things that the BC NDP could do to sort of rein in this industry.
So we have one question that is, and I'll direct it to whoever feels they can answer this question. How does renewable natural gas differ from the current the kind of extraction and fracking extraction that we're talking about.
We wrote an article about this a couple of issues ago in the Watershed Sentinel. I was actually always really interested in this. Renewable natural gas is produced naturally from decaying organic matter, whether it's sewage or peat bogs, or like water, plants that are put under water release methane as they rot. And a lot of people are actually already collecting the methane from the garbage dumps. So I wanted to know whether we could actually just switch to renewable natural gas. And our reporter Gavin McRae went out and dug and dug and dug, and he kept coming back and telling me, sorry, this is really bad news. There is no potential for enough methane collection to have a renewable natural gas industry that fills the same domestic use as what we're doing with fracked gas, which, by the way, someone else asked, fracked gas is about 90% of what comes into your house.
Yeah, that's a good question.
And the other thing this leads directly to, and I'm not sure who can answer this, is somebody else was asking about hydrogen, because our reporter told us eventually the one ray of hope is to mix hydrogen, which is abundant, into the methane, into the natural gas, so that you're burning a mix of hydrogen and gas, and that lowers its carbon emissions. But that, is not really, it's not really the same as solar power. So that's where I got to with, or we got to with that question about renewable natural gas. I still pay for it extra myself, but that's just because I like bugging Fortis.
Peter, do you have a response to that, or Eoin?
Yeah, I did want to, we've done a fair amount of thinking on renewable natural gas and hydrogen lately. And, I think Dolores is totally right. It's, useful for a couple really, really hard to electrify uses of natural gas. But the idea that we're just going to switch from, fracked gas to renewable gas is nonsense. We have so little of it, and it needs to be treated like the precious resource that it is if we're pulling it out of landfills and not just burned in people's cooking stoves and that kind of thing. As for hydrogen, there's the federal government's coming out with a hydrogen strategy soon, and really it's disappointing to see how much of it focuses on fossil hydrogen. There's some magical thinking involved with the idea that fracking and gas is going to be able to use carbon capture to take away the emissions that they have, and then create hydrogen with it and be able to capture the carbon that comes off of it. It's not reality yet, and it's not reality as fast as it needs to be.
Yeah, the natural gas producers are hoping that they're latching on to hydrogen as the way for them to bail themselves out. It's because you can produce hydrogen from natural gas cheaper than you can do it by electrolysis of water. And they're hoping that will bail them out, save them. Unfortunately, of course, hydrogen is almost impossible to liquefy. It's minus 260, and to transport. You have to get it down to minus 260, which requires huge amounts of energy. And the preferred way of actually transporting and using hydrogen is to convert it to ammonia, which is toxic, smelly, and very energy inefficient. So long way to go before hydrogen is doing us any good at all. And I think it would actually do us bad if the natural gas producers get their hands on the hydrogen future of Canada. Watch out.
Yeah, right. Yes, and there was another question around the safety of hydrogen compared to LNG.
Not much difference. Everybody remembered the Zeppelin, that incident in New York? That was filled with hydrogen. You feel comfortable if your future flight plans include a Zeppelin that part with hydrogen involved. Give up smoking.
Right.
Okay.
I think that there have been, there's, a number of comments about how do we move this agenda. June has said, frankly, fracking has been on the radar in terms of water issues and climate change for the last 15 or 20 years. And, how do we take into account that we have been slow in reacting, certainly here in British Columbia? What can we be doing to increase the population's knowledge? I think it's John Waring who's been sort of intervening and sort of saying, well, but some of the tactics, they're not going to listen if we're nice. So there are, I think, a range of issues that people are beginning to think about around activism. A number of the environmental organizations are meeting together in an LNG network that's being hosted by My Sea to Sky. That network chose to focus on the issue of subsidies, how much the government is subsidizing the industry during the September election, thinking that was an issue that actually it's one of the kind of vulnerable points for the industry and for government. Right now, when we begin to expose how much money they're spending on subsidies and how little is coming back, in fact, how much it's costing us, it exposes this whole set of arguments and is a good entry. So there are petitions that a number of organizations have taken this up as campaigns. Dogwood, My Sea to Sky. Who else? Owen, do you remember? Can you be backing me up on this? Anyway, a number.
Understand, and there are quite a few parties. Douglas Chenoweth. Yeah.
So that's one of the initiatives that's taking place right now. I think that there are a number of organizations that are beginning to get, feel as if that's it's an excellent entryway to conversations with politicians, but there still needs to be this solid solidarity with First Nations who are dealing with it, dealing with the actual incursions on their land. So that needs to continue. Their actions need to be backed up, I think a range of organizations, not just environmental organizations, but citizens groups, need to be beginning to raise this question of why are we doing this at all? And what, at the very least, there needs to be a moratorium on the fracking, if not shutting the whole thing down. So that needs to be built.
Alice, if I could just make a comment here, because I know we're coming up to our time in a few minutes. I'm just writing a book right now on hope and activism. Called The Little Book of Hope, Lessons from a Lifetime of Activism. So I've really been thinking about long-term activism and the concept of realistic hope as versus,
Right.
false optimism, or it'll all be all right, which is kind of similar to pessimism, because both say you don't have to do anything, but, informed dissent. You're in it for the long haul, and you can't make a decision or make an assessment about whether something's been successful just by saying, did we do this by such and such a date? Or did we get this law and that everything wasn't all right already? We have to see what we do. And I've been looking back on my own life and career, my time from the women's movement and different human rights aspects, the work on economic globalization, how we chased the World Trade Organization around the world and gave them deep distress, we like to think, and they're a shadow of their former self. And I just look at some of the issues that we've won, and it took a long time. And this is the benefit of getting older and being able to look back on things and saying, building a movement, learning new things, bringing new people in, having the better relationship as we do, as settlers do with First Nations than ever I've seen in my lifetime. All of these are really important steps towards winning. And all of a sudden, you know, you think, oh, it's this hill's too steep. I can't push that boulder up there, you know. Hey, you're right there. You're at the top. You're close. I have a good feeling about both Site C and fracking, not only the economic argument, but I really think that we could be at a tipping point. And I want for us to be feeling just two messages I'd leave you. One is that it's for us as a movement, I just want to talk about being an activist, that it's always too soon to give up, and it's always too soon to go home. Like, you just keep at it. And I would quote Banksy, the wonderful political artist from Great Britain. He says, if you're tired, learn to rest, not to quit.
Yep. The other thing that we can do that's sort of besides the subsidies thing and getting them out of there, which would deal with almost all of the issue. The other thing that I think we should be doing is harassing every license, every permit, demanding really tight regulations. Like I've talked, people phone me and they talk about what goes on with those wells and the drilling and the concrete, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to regulate that stuff really tightly. It's sort of like the care homes. The better you regulate it, the less the profit motive is operational. And that's what we have to do with fracking. And I think that we can call it ban fracking, and that's just fine. But the end result will be regulating it down, much like we did with pulp mill effluent, which was running unchecked in 1990. But we got it. And we can do the same thing with this.
Peter, were you wanting to get in on this?
Yeah, no, I think I actually just have to apologize. My colleague needs the room. I hadn't planned on being in here today, but
Oh, right.
I'd like
Okay.
to thank you for the invitation.
Okay.
Owen, I think, was trying to talk. Nope. Okay.
Okay. Well, I mean, on this note of how we move forward together, I would like to draw this particular conversation to a close, but knowing that it feels like the beginning of several others and beginning of a real kind of set of concerns about this industry and what's happening. For anybody who's actually wanting to take a look, I was thinking while Peter was making his presentation, just go to Google Satellite. You can actually see the impact from a Google satellite search over northeastern British Columbia. We will continue to try to open up windows into what's happening in this part of the world and onto the industry. And if we can be in touch with us about how you would like to take this forward, whether there's any, sort of actions that we might want to, should know about, do stay in touch with us, okay? And we trust that everyone is staying safe and staying well.
And we're going to try and make the registration process for session 2 a little smoother, because I think there were some glitches for people trying to get onto this session. Okay. And I'm going to try to sort that out in the next week.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Yes, information will be up on the Watersheds Sentinel website. Owen's slides and the whole webinar.
Okay, that's great. Okay, last words, we're closed. Okay, bye everyone.
And we're off. Bye, Alice.